Hello, I'm Conor McReynolds, and welcome to another episode of The Dinner Party. In each episode of this podcast, I speak to a brilliant guest to learn all about the people who have inspired them most. They get to choose 5 people to invite to their dream dinner party, and we learn more about who those people are and how they've influenced the dinner party host. This week, I am so excited to be joined by a comedian who I really love gigging with, Jake Farrell. Jake recently contributed to Penguin Random House's Edinburgh Unlocked audiobook, a collection of sets from brilliant comedians who in other circumstances would have been performing at this year's Fringe. Jake's a fascinating guy whose content is as thoughtful as it is hilarious. I really can't wait to speak to him about his guest choices, which are just so good. So here he is. This is the dream dinner party of Jake Farrell. Jake Farrell, hello. Thank you so much for joining me on the dinner party.
Oh, thanks for having me, mate. It's lovely to be here.
It's lovely to speak to you. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm just at my desk, just done another day of lockdown, working from home. So, yeah.
How are you getting on with that? You work in charity, for a charity, don't you?
Yeah, I work for a charity, an education charity that helps young people go to uni. So it's been a bit of a weird 3 weeks. With
mad busy time for you at the minute.
It's been all right. I mean, I've kind of, I guess, relatively lucky given everything. Obviously, I did have about 2 weeks where I wondered if the charity that I work for would be there at the end of the week. But after that, it's been all right. Yeah, I mean, as I say, as lucky as you can be given all the madness.
And kind of outside of the work you're doing for charity, have you been kind of embracing sort of new world comedy, like online gigs, driving gigs, outdoor, all that stuff?
Well, I didn't do any online gigs. I did my first gig back on Saturday.
Wow.
And that was fun. It was just about 20 people there. It was all kind of social distance and stuff. That was cool. I mean, again, I think kind of fortunate in as much it's like, as I kind of had a bit of a hack line in the end, that it's like the only time in my life where I've been glad not to be a professional stand-up comedian. Do you know what I mean? Like it's when it all went south, it was like, Christ, I would have. That's exactly what I wanted to be doing. So it was like I was kind of in the fortunate position where I didn't really have to do the online stuff for like money and food. So it's like I didn't really go near it. I wouldn't mind doing one of the driving ones. They look a bit weird.
They're quite fun. Yeah, well, Jericho Comedy have been organising a few. So I got to perform a few drive-ins kind of early on. And I find them really fun. Like basically what I kind of thought was I need to make a decision at the beginning because I'm not going to hear very much laughter.
Yeah.
I have to decide whether I'm going to tell myself it's going terribly and people aren't enjoying it.
Just plow on.
Or tell myself that I'm having the best gig of my life and everybody's in their cars cracking up.
That's basically the mentality I bring to every gig anyway.
Exactly, yeah. There was no shift for me not hearing laughter.
Yeah. I don't hear much laughter, but I decide I'm just going to plow on anyway for my own enjoyment. They sound like they're for me. You can convince yourself you're Simon Amstel for the evening or one of those. Yeah, for sure.
Well, Jake, you're being very, very modest. You are. I was so excited to book you in for this chat because I love gigging with you. I've been lucky enough through Jericho Comedy to gig with you a few times, and I just think you're such an interesting performer. If anybody's listening to the podcast and hasn't had the pleasure of seeing you live, we actually have a little clip of you recorded live at Jericho Comedy. So, Jake, do you want to have the experience of introducing yourself?
Yeah, go on then. How do you want me to do it? Just give us a big
as if you're calling yourself on stage at Jericho Comedy. Let's do that.
Please welcome to the stage the man, a 29-year-old man with the hairline of a 39-year-old man, who is probably, knowing my experiences at Jericho, about to be very, very unkind, but in a funny way, to a group of scared middle-class people.
That's fantastic. Here he is.
No, it's cool. I love Oxford. I love my hometown though as well. I'm from a town called Stevenage. Has anyone heard of it? Yeah. What context you heard about Stevenage in, mate?
I lived there shortly and I left pretty quick.
Thanks very much for having me, everyone. Take care. That was weird as well, because I was like, does anyone live in Stevenage? This guy was like, bang, me! I know we're all having a lovely time, but I got something negative to say. Let's fucking go! What's your name again?
Brendan.
Brendan. Oh, we were glad when you left, actually. That was it, we had the big party, I remember now why we had that big party. Thank fuck Brendan's left. That was the song. That was it. No, why did you leave?
Well, it's sort of temporary. I only live there. My aunt lives there, so.
Okay, great. I love Stevenage, right? Long story short, I love Stevenage. I'm very proud of coming from Stevenage. We're the world's first new town, right? Not everyone is as complimentary, as you found out. Other people, less complimentary though. There's this one writer that's constantly slagging us off in his work. You might have heard of him. He's called Charles Dickens, right? Now, Charles Dickens once said of Stevenage, nothing happens there except nothingness itself. Prick, okay? That is a bit rich as well, coming from a bloke that wrote a book called Mr. Humphrey's Clock. Quite a bit of nothingness in that as well as it goes. Just like Chaz has had a go at someone when he's got no right to there, right? We've all done that. I've been there. When I was the sports editor of my university paper, I tweeted at the football correspondent of the BBC because he tweeted his own name, right? So I tweeted at him saying, Phil McNulty, you get paid 70 grand a year to write about football and you just tweeted your own name, you're an idiot. And quick as a flash, he tweeted me back and went, that means a lot coming from you, Jake. Sick burn from Phil there. But like, that's what we do. Everyone's had a go at someone when you've got no right to, right? And Dicko's had a go at us when he's got no right to. Because I looked him up on Encarta, and it turns out that he wrote a lot of his novels whilst living in Broadstairs in Kent. Now, I went there for my auntie's 50th birthday, had some lovely fresh whelks, but it's not exactly Vegas, is it? Having to go at somewhere else for being boring when you live in Broadstairs is like Piers Morgan calling someone a smug cunt, all right? It's not ideal. Moral of the story being, don't throw stones if you live in a glass house in fucking Broadstairs, all right? It's called Bleak House for a reason, mate. It's hard enough when people that are not from the town are having a go at Stevenage, but we've got a bit of a problem as well, because people from Stevenage tend to portray Stevenage in quite a negative light as well, which isn't ideal. But Brendan is just one in a long line of people.
Fantastic, Jake. So, we've all heard a little clip of you there. It's absolutely wonderful. For those who haven't seen you, like, what would you kind of say to people that your comedy is like about? What would kind of be your elevator pitch for your persona and the topics that you're drawn to talking about?
Yeah, I always find that one really hard to answer, I guess. I mean, I think ultimately there's probably, if I was being really kind of wanky about it, I think there's something about the persona of it is someone who is simultaneously both kind of a smart aleck who thinks he knows better than everyone else, whilst also being relatively vulnerable and self-deprecating. I know that sounds a bit like a kind of impossible like dichotomy, but like that's kind of, I guess, where it's at, is that it's like someone who's got, which kind of mirrors roughly my actual real persona, I guess, is someone with just enough confidence to do it at all, but then not enough to like be a fully kind of balls out leather jacket American kind of someone hopefully with a bit more kind of self-awareness and self-deprecation than one of those idiots, I guess.
It's a really fine balance when you describe it like that, but I think you really you manage it so well, and you also manage to do it with such a degree of warmth. Like, to what extent would you say your comic persona, you kind of touched on it there, that it is quite close to your personality. Do you think you're quite authentically yourself on stage?
Oh, bloody hell, Carl, that's a wonderful question. This is, again, maybe descending slightly into wankiness, but there's someone told me, there's a quote, I think it's Miles Davis said like it takes a long time to sound like yourself, or something like along those lines. And I think that was kind of what it was like for me in a way, because I was so, as everyone is, so heavily influenced at the beginning that it was almost like a parody, where I was somewhere between kind of Russell Brand and Liam Williams, if that's even possible. And I wasn't really like either of them, to be honest. So I kind of did a lot of this kind of dour, moody stuff that was kind of aping Liam Williams. It wasn't really reflective of who I am. So I think as it's gone along, I have managed to tread that line, like you say, of being a bit more. It feels more natural to me, the stuff that I do now, and it helps with the writing, I guess, because when it's coming from a consistent and like authentic place, then it just kind of comes out of you a bit. You don't have to pretend to be someone you're not, I guess.
So
yeah, I think over the years I've gradually got towards something approximating myself, which is
do you think in a way as well, like as you say, when you're writing stuff, do you think it's like a good way to sort of get to know yourself a bit better in a weird way? That might sound even wankier than anything else, but do you think when you're kind of writing, it's a good way of kind of clarifying your own thoughts and perspectives on things?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, actually, because I think I've probably first started out writing things from the point of view that I thought was like acceptable or cool or whatever, and I think I'm less like that now. And yeah, like I started doing this thing, or I started doing this bit very shortly before lockdown, and obviously I've done it once since, that was about like living through history and how the pandemic, you're kind of living through history, but I would have preferred to live through World War II, because there was this kind of moral line where you just knew where you were at. It was just you were for the Nazis or against them, and I think like that kind of is a bit more of an old-fashioned or traditional point of view, right? There's a kind of lot of moral relativism that is applied to situations now, and oh well, people were doing the best they can. But actually, I think I am to some extent like an old-fashioned 40-year-old in a pub, just going, look, the Nazis were wrong. I would have fought against them. That's it. There's no, you know what I mean? There's some things. There's good people and there's bad people, and
I think it's worryingly relevant still, though.
Maybe,
I think you can still be for and against Nazis.
Yeah, true. I guess that is a long way of saying, I think, yes, I've realised that in writing that bit, I've gone, that is what I think about those things. That clarifies where I am on some of those issues. My desire, I guess, to kind of like smooth the edges of a increasingly complex and like ragged world to some kind of understandable binary, which is probably the work of a simpleton in some way. But it's definitely where I'm at, I think.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You say things like moral relativism, and it's that's a big area to explore. And you do talk about kind of philosophy and class and literature, and like you do deal with some quite big things on stage, in ways that feel really accessible as well. And I think that's one of the great successes of your writing and performing.
I think that was something. Sorry, I cut you off there.
No, please go ahead.
I was going to say that, like, what the process of me, I think, becoming a even partially watchable comedian has been a process of like, I used to start with the big issue and try and make it funny, if you know what I mean. Like, I was obsessed with comedy that said something or that had some kind of purpose or was like serious in a way, which is, I think, a bit, is somewhere not something I think of as much now. And I think, to go back, like, it's a very lame or kind of embarrassing thing to say, but I was pretty much obsessed with, I thought Liam Williams was like it was a comedy that I'd never really seen before, and he talked about climate change, environmentalism, and political action and whatever, but he had funny things to say that so happened to be about those things. He didn't write political action on a whiteboard and then start writing. Do you know what I mean? And the first couple of years, I came at it from that perspective of going, what have I got to say that's funny about about like climate change or whatever, and the answer is nothing because no one's got anything funny to say about climate change.
Yeah.
But then in the, like more recently, where I think I've become again better and I'm more proud of my stuff, is I'll tell a story about my granddad or something, and then in the process of doing that, I'll go, oh, that's kind of about identity or class, and then I'll maybe lean into it a bit. But the inciting incident wasn't me trying to be some kind of pseudo intellectual. It was just me trying to be funny, which is like,
Yeah.
sounds obvious, but is key for I can't stress that enough. That's the kind of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. We had a really interesting conversation on the other podcast that we do, the Jericho Comedy Podcast. Chatted to Jacob Hawley a few weeks ago, and he was talking about something very similar, where he was watching comedians who he said he was fascinated by the fact that they weren't kind of making an interesting point and then saying something funny, or saying something funny and tagging an interesting point onto it. That the interesting point was also the funny thing, and that they were able to make those two sort of separate things one thing, and that was the achievement of the writing. And I think that's something that I kind of recognize in your writing as well. Is that it sounds like that's something that you've kind of discovered, like you say, through telling your stories and that kind of thing, that those two things can become one.
For sure, yeah. And I think that is a good way of articulating it. Basically, is that just coming at it from a different angle. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that is kind of when you come at things from a different angle, that enables you to do that. Basically, and I think it's just kind of getting over those growing pains of when you first start. You basically are trying to emulate people who are far more skillful than you, and that's quite a dangerous thing to do, isn't it, really?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So yeah, but no, I think as I've gone on, I've definitely got better at that, and I've more enjoyed my own stuff and more enjoyed performing actually as I've gone on.
That's cool. That's really cool. I mentioned Jacob there, and I think there's a kind of common area of interest in you and Jacob's comedy, that you both talk about class in a really interesting way. You have a great line where you say that you're working class for a comedian.
Yeah,
That's a great line. Can you kind of explain that line, or kind of dig into that a little bit more? Because I thought it's such a striking line. It's such an interesting thing to say.
yeah. Well, I think sadly, in some ways, and I think this is why Jacob and I have this kind of interest in common, I guess, to a certain extent, is that in order to stand out or to kind of at least make some headway in a very crowded marketplace, you have to have an angle, effectively, which I think is a bit of a shame, but is kind of understandable from the kind of commercial interests that effectively shape and run the industry. It makes sense to have yourself in a kind of in this like ready and available shape, which is like, I'm a kind of working class person who's happened to stumble into this who's kind of other in this like non-working class world. And I think that line came from basically a kind of a sense of shame, effectively, in that I am not, by the strictest definition of the word now, working class, in that I'm a university graduate who works in a kind of professional managerial class kind of job, effectively doing spreadsheets like everyone else. And I think culturally I'm working class in that my dad is a postman and my mum works at a high street bank, and they never went to university. But I think it's about effectively the alienation that you kind of feel as a social someone who's experienced the upside of social mobility, I guess, in that I don't really feel truly at home in the world of my kind of university friends, many of whom are kind of third generation university graduates, and their parents have much more access to kind of capital and property, and also don't feel truly at home in a world of my kind of peers from school, many of whom went to university, many of whom went and dropped out, many of whom didn't go at all. So I think it's effectively, I think, a self-deprecating joke, where in the cosseted kind of world of comedy, I qualify as working class by virtue of the fact that my dad does a normal job. And, but by in any other world, I would actually probably be a soft-handed ponce, which is more in line with what I am, I guess. So yeah, I guess that is trying to communicate those two things, and at the same time is that I don't like to renounce that, and that's something my friends and I kind of talk about. I've got one mate who's kind of like, well, we're kind of middle class now, and it's like, well, I think that a lot of the benefits of being middle class are kind of carry on throughout your life, and we've never had those, and we don't retain those. Do you know what I mean? Culturally, or whatever. But we're not truly working class either, in that I don't get up and do a manual job 5 days a week or 6 days a week like my dad does. So yeah, I
It's a
guess that's a
really
long way of
interesting
saying this.
area to explore.
Yeah,
Really, really interesting. I
um,
mean, and as you say, it is to an you know, I see what you mean when you say it's kind of slightly regrettable that you've got to, for want of a better word, kind of market yourself as like, I'm working class interests in literature and philosophy, and maybe
yeah.
two things that culturally people don't necessarily always put together because of preconceptions and that kind of thing. Do you think there is enough going on in comedy to kind of, because there's been so much happening to redress the kind of gross imbalance in terms of representation when it comes to gender and race,
Yeah.
but do you think there are enough kind of working class comedic voices being amplified?
For the purposes of my own career, no, absolutely not. No, no. I think more could be done, and I think that, I mean, it's maybe not a completely popular opinion, but I do believe that sometimes when we rightfully make those adjustments in order to kind of increase diversity on the lines of whether it's sexuality or gender or race or whatever, I think ultimately, if you then if the people that you make space for then are still from the same economic class as all of the other white men, then ultimately, do you get much divergence of opinion or experience? And you definitely do then, still on the basis of race and gender. But there's other areas where maybe you could be made more space for. I mean, not to sit here literally as like a 29-year-old white bloke kind of moaning, and I'm not, because I think that I think that basically I do have a kind of advantage in those respects, but I think it is an area where it could improve. I like look at a lot of the output, especially in kind of sitcoms and stuff, and they effectively fetishize working class people or kind of working class experience in a way that shows like limited or no understanding of it. And working class people are kind of portrayed often in a way that I don't recognize from my upbringing, both as kind of like feckless or disloyal or kind of self-interested, and that's kind of played for laughs. And that's not something I recognize. So I think it's more about that kind of that diversity of representation and the way that those experiences are portrayed, rather than the people that get to sit on panel shows, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. That makes total sense. I'm kind of moving slightly away from this because there's so many things I want to talk to you about before we even come to the actual main course of the podcast, which is, of course, your dream dinner party. But I can't not talk to you about something very cool that you did over lockdown, which was contributing to Penguin Random House's Edinburgh Unlocked audiobook, which was, your part of that was so fantastic. I really, really loved listening to it. It's a very cool project to be a part of. How did it come about?
Well, I guess there's probably quite a simple, underwhelming answer in that I was in that I was I'd been approached. Well, I wanted to get basically a producer to do my Edinburgh show that would have been the Edinburgh Just Gone, and I really liked this producer called Burke's Nest, who'd made loads of shows that I liked and thought were cool. So I asked them to come and watch one of my shows. They came and they said they really liked it and they wanted to produce my show. And then the show is going to be on in the Pleasance Courtyard about 8 o'clock, I think, or maybe 9 o'clock. I can't remember now.
Man.
And so I was all like kind of hyped up for doing that and a bit excited. And then it didn't happen. But then Penguin approached Burke's Nest and said, "Who do you think might be good to do this project?" And they were also, I guess I was lucky in that they were looking for a mixture of experienced acts who would actually have some clout to sell the book, and debutantes that people had never heard of and probably were cheaper. So I got in on the debutant card, and I said, I will take whatever amount of money you've written on that piece of paper. It doesn't matter. Just let me be in the audiobook, please. So that was how I got involved. And then Berksness was really helpful in helping me kind of hone it down and get it ready. And it was a mixture of kind of new stuff and then stand up that I'd done already. But I was
I
man,
loved the piece so much. And as you said,
you.
some of the pieces in it were adapted from bits of stand-up, and there were bits that I recognized that I love, but also you'd adapted them so perfectly for the format. I mean, what was that challenge like of delivering, what is essentially a kind of a stand-up idea to an audience that you can't see or hear?
Yeah, that was something I did think a lot about, actually, and I know that other people went with quite high concept stuff and went with quite like really kind of meta ideas, and some of them were amazing. What I really wanted to get across basically is that I think I'm more of a writer than I am a performer in some ways, or I'm better at writing, and that's the thing I enjoy the most. And I wanted to effectively make it like a short story that was funny. That was what I kept saying to people, and they kept nodding at me and smiling as though it made sense. And yeah, I mean, God, I'm probably going to get some kind of sectioned for stalking or something. But Liam Williams's Ladhood was from Radio 4 was like a big thing. Whereas I kind of wanted it to sound like that, but not like that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It was really important to me that it sounded effectively like a piece of prose, or like and was more wordy and gave me more space to kind of write into the ideas, where a lot of the humor is probably communicated through body language or acting out on stage. So yeah, it was something that we did think long and hard about, and I was pleased with how it came out, really, in that it felt like a good kind of representation of what my act is kind of like, without obviously being like stand up. I don't really think you can kind of migrate stand up to that format, really.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think knowing your stand up as I do, and having heard the book and re-listened to the bit today, I can confirm that everything you set out to do, you achieved just spectacularly. I really, really loved it. And if anybody's listening to this and hasn't checked out the Edinburgh Unlocked audiobook yet, it's so damn good. You can even, if you've not signed up to Audible, you can get it for free. I don't get a commission for saying that. I just think it's a brilliant thing that you should listen to.
And neither do I. There's no royalties involved. So to be honest, just contact me directly and I'll send you the link if you
want. I'm really interested in this thing that you said just then, that you see yourself as more of a writer than a performer, and that writing is the thing you love. And I'm slightly obsessed. Listeners who kind of have listened to every episode of this will probably be rolling their eyes and anticipating the question. They'll be sick of hearing it now. But I am obsessed with talking to creative people about other creative endeavors that they kind of aspire to take on, or like people's, for want of a better term, like creative bucket lists.
Yeah.
And you talk about being a writer and how you see yourself. Do you have ambitions to like write a sitcom, write sketches, write a novel? Is there something else that you're kind of yearning to try that you haven't got around to doing yet?
Well, I think I would like to write something on the length and kind of scope of a novel one day. I think ultimately, if I could imagine a life where I would be happy, that would be more in line with it than like going around the country and the associated like stomach churning anxiety of performing every night. You know what I mean? Like, I think that kind of fits with it more, and the bit I really enjoy, I think, is the writing aspect of it. And I do the odd bit of journalism here and there, and I've got a mate who's in about as big a hardcore punk band as you can be, which is not massive, but like for them, they're an amazing band from my hometown, and I write all the album liner notes for them and stuff like that, and I've
cool.
kind of got a few bits and pieces on the go, but. So yeah, I think that would be ideal, really. Like, I love stand up and I love performing, but like I don't really I don't really love the kind of adversarial Saturday night. I've got to win you round with like 3 jokes in 20 seconds. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'm very much a luxury player in that respect. I'm not the first name on the team sheet for that kind of thing, and that's where it's kind of such a shame about Edinburgh. Really, like I know that the Pleasance and whatever gets a lot of stick, and in some quarters as being kind of an exclusive kind of club or whatever, but all I've ever really wanted to do is do a show about ideas and have people, and not many either, 30-40 people turn up every night and watch it, and me just be there with a mic and do it. That's my version of what I'd really like to do stand up wise, to be honest. So I was a bit gutted about it all, and it kind of don't really know what's coming next in terms of what I will do in stand up, but yeah, that's kind
the
of
ideas that you had for this year. Hopefully, would you say they're transferable for kind of doing a show next year, or
I don't know how transferable anything is. Do you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
It truly does feel like why does anyone want to hear about my granddad after all this? It's like I don't know if they're like. Yeah, I think some of them are. I think the show was a lot about class, and was a lot about kind of. It might be applicable in as much as a lot of it was about what do you do when you kind of life intrudes on you following a kind of luxurious dream, I guess, which comedy is to a certain extent. So a lot of that might hold over, and it might even be more applicable in a time where kind of the straightened times that are already on us and are about to come. So yeah, hopefully a lot of it might hang around, but it's just like it was meant to be a bit of an inflection point of like maybe it's the beginning of generating my own audience. And all I've ever really wanted to, I don't want to be on Live at the Apollo. Do you know what I mean? I just want to do part-time work and part-time going around to art centres to have a load of other soft-handed ponces listen to me talk about class. That's all I want.
That is the most honest dream I've ever heard anyone express. I admire that.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to go to be told I'm a ginger wanker in like Runcorn on a Friday. Do you know what I mean? For £100, I'm not good at that. I need to be on my own turf with a load of other jaded hipsters. That's what I need. And so yeah, hopefully there'll be some market for that when this is all over.
I fully believe in that idea for you. I want more for you, but I think I think that sounds absolutely perfect, and I totally relate to it in a big way. Jake, I've got to ask you now about your dream dinner party. It's why you've graciously given up your time to talk to me. You've put together. Sometimes when I'm chatting to people on this podcast, I see their guest list and the question answers itself. Like, what's the tone of the party going to be? It's going to so obviously be this or that based on the people who are going. And for yours, I genuinely can't pin it down. So I'm really interested to know, given the party that you've envisaged that we're going to talk about, what do you think the tone of this evening is going to be?
It's a good question. It's one I've thought about quite a bit. It could go in a number of different directions, not all of them pleasant. I think so. Every year, my mate Andy has us all round for Christmas dinner, and it's quite funny because we all put on shirts and like he cooks a lovely dinner, and we talk about how much we all love each other. And then about 4 hours later, we put on very loud Trinidadian soca music and dance around his kitchen while drinking apple sours. And so there's like a kind of two things going on at once there. And that's my ideal dinner party, one that basically starts out as quite nice and festive and then descends into something approaching hell. So I guess that's the tone that I would ultimately like to engender. I think there's a couple of characters in this list that could be quite hard work, but you never know. If they're on form, could be quality. If not, could all be going home at 9:30.
It's a high stakes scenario you've painted there. If you get them and the stars align,
exactly,
this could be
ages. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about where this dinner party would be happening then. If you could choose anywhere in the world to gather this extraordinary group of people together, where would you want this to happen? What do you think gives you the best chance of the party being a success?
I think what you'd want is some kind of solitude, I think. So you'd probably
Mm-hmm.
want some nice Airbnb in like the Cotswolds or the country somewhere, or like the Scottish Highlands. I'm not too particular
Oh
on where, just
yeah.
as long as it's kind of solitude, because you've got some big personalities. And I think you'd
Yes.
want a lot of space to spread out. Ideally, a kitchen island, because that's always sets the mood off quite nicely, I think.
Yeah.
So something along those lines. I think like I couldn't be around my flat. Do you know what I mean? I think when you see the kind of people that I've got coming, you want everyone to have their own nice bedroom, ideally with an ensuite at the end of the night. So kind of like one of the places. I don't. Do you watch Mortimer and Whitehouse Gone Fishing? Because there's that TV show. They go fishing
I'm
and they stay in
familiar
an
with it. I
Airbnb.
haven't watched it yet, but I know the kind of thing you mean.
They just stay in these lovely kind of like isolated Airbnbs or holiday cottages or whatever. That's the kind of vibe that
Yeah.
I'm looking for, I think.
I think that works very nicely. I like the thought of you being somewhere so remote with these people, the kind of you're cut off from everyone and everywhere else, and it's
Yeah,
just you and these personalities,
exactly. And I
and
think it would
no distractions.
aid my management of the evening, because I think some of them I'd be like, "Look, we're not going anywhere. Let's all muck in here. You do a bit of the washing up or something. We're all in this together."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
If you're near a tube station or a cab, like I say, you could be knocking down to two people at 9 o'clock and then looking at putting on a DVD or something, and that's when you know you've had a shit one. So it's the last thing I want.
All right. Well, let's assume then that you find this perfect isolated cottage and your first guest is about to arrive. Your first guest is one of the most celebrated British writers of the 20th century, the absolute master of the spy, thriller, espionage genre. You're inviting John le Carre.
Yeah,
When did you first become a le Carre fan?
yeah. My granddad Roy was into Le Carre, and he lent me a couple, and I didn't really read them, or I had it in my head that he was really lowbrow because I was so aware of his name. If you know what I mean, like I
Okay,
kind of
yeah.
in a tier with those kind of people, and then I got into him probably about 3 or 4 years ago in a big way, and haven't really read much of anyone else since because there's
Oh,
quite a lot.
wow.
There's quite a lot of he's got quite a lot of books, and I could
Yeah.
talk about him forever, to be honest. So you might have to stop me, but I mean, I think what I love about him is that, like you say, he is one of the most celebrated authors of his generation, of the last however many years. But in a way, I
Mhm,
think he's probably underrated because of he writes a genre fiction basically, and I think there's a kind of
mhm,
snobbishness that looks down on that. And it is one of those things that I think really good books do, where you like read it, and this is probably his most famous novel was The Spy That Came In From the Cold, or maybe Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. But there are
mhm.
the lessons or insights in those books that were written like 30 years ago that still stand today, I think, and that's kind of the work of a true genius,
Well,
I
that's
think.
interesting. Is it the observations, like because some of them are kind of satires at their time, or kind of condemnations at the time that he's living in. Do you think it's those particular viewpoints that are still relevant, or is it just the quality of the storytelling that makes them kind of timeless?
Well, I mean, he's so knowledgeable about the world that he's writing in because he was a spy for a bit.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of been overplayed from what I've read of his autobiography and what he's written about his life,
Hmm.
how deep in the spy world he was. But I think so. All of those things still stand, and even the novels that he's released in the last 4 or 5 years are kind of spot on in terms of geopolitics, or in
Hmm.
terms of the relationship between the individual and the state. But more than that, I think the things that really are kind of eternal are the ways in which he describes men and their desperation and them getting old and them getting things wrong and them not being able to form lasting relationships and yeah, I mean, like, George Smiley is one of the most famous characters in English literature, but is genuinely, I think, instructive to kind of men and women of all ages and whatever really backgrounds. And I think that's pretty remarkable, to be honest, to be able to do that and to be able to write like a proper story, like a ripping story at the same time. Is like that's like the Radiohead of books, isn't it?
It sounds like what you're saying about his writing is really profound. Like you're saying that it kind of gets to like the kind of depth of on some level kind of humanity and
Well,
I mean that
I
word
think so.
desperation carries some baggage there. Like it's quite intense.
I think it is, yeah. And I mean, I think he's kind of well known in a way, or the cliche about him is he kind of subverts the standard of the spy novel in as much as his characters live these quite dreary, bureaucratic lives. And I mean, Smiley himself is, and this is why the Gary Oldman version of him is not very good, because Smiley is kind of not very sexually alluring and is a bit portly and is old and can't run, let alone shoot a gun, but just does everything kind of through his kind of his understanding of the world that they live in, and that's how he kind of achieves success. And so I think there's a lot to like in that in this kind of very frank portrayal of men in their middle age battling against time and the kind of changing world around them. There is, I think, a real sadness in that. And that's, for me, the overriding thing I love about the books, and also the thing that the books are really about. I don't really think the books are really about the intricacies of each plot. The books are about people trying and failing and kind of trying again while the world slowly revolves around them. And that's, and I mean, what more do you want than that, Connor?
That's an extraordinary kind of summary of them, and I think it's really profound. I mean, what would you hope to get out of a conversation with Le Carre? What would you most want to ask him about or hear about?
Well, that's a good question, because I was lucky enough to go to. So one of the reasons I've invited him is because of all of that kind of pretentious toss that I've just said, but also because I was lucky enough to go. He did a talk at the German embassy last year because he's like a big Germanophile. Is that the right word? Anyway, and
yeah, sure,
we'll take it. And he was great. He did like a Q&A, and he's like 84, I think, but he's sharp as a tack. And he's a great kind of storyteller. And I don't know if I'm racially profiling you here, Connor, but in my family, which is some of Irish descent, being a kind of great storyteller that people enjoy listening to.
We love a good story. Yeah.
I think a high premium is placed on that. And conversely, I fucking hate people who are shit at telling stories. So Le Carre was even in his age. He turned up in a suit that probably cost more than I earn in a year, and he just looked the kind of he looked really refined and like a man who'd lived his life properly with values. And he told this story about. So Alec Guinness was famously played George Smiley in a couple of bits and pieces, but I think most famously in the TV series of Tinker Tailor, which was I think 1976 or something like that. Yeah, and they became friends, which is kind of cool in and of itself. And he said that Alec Guinness used to live outside of London and he lived in London, and he'd ring him up, and his real name's David, and he'd say, he'd ring him up and he'd answer and he'd go, hello. And Alec Guinness would go, hello, David. And then John Le Carre would go, oh, hello, Alec, how are you? And he'd go, how did you know it was me? Which I thought was a lovely little anecdote, which probably let down by my poor imitation of Alec Guinness's.
I was just admiring your Alec Guinness. I think it's an admirable one.
So I'd be hoping to get more. I think he's probably got 100 of those kind of stories. You know what I mean? I'd be hoping to winkle a few of those out of him after a few ports as the night wore on, I think.
Oh, excellent. I like that. He lived, you mentioned that he was a spy. Even his personal life was a very interesting one. Like, his mother abandoned him at the age of 5. They were reunited when he was 21. His father was a known associate of the Cray twins and spent much of his life in prison. And he feuded with Salman Rushdie over the Satanic Verses. Le Carre was quoted as saying, nobody has a God-given right to insult a great religion and be published with impunity. So he's a
Yeah.
man of strong opinions as well.
Yeah, and you're very good at this, Connor, because I had a little note to talk about that. His dad as well. His dad, he wrote a book called A Perfect Spy, which is like this semi-autobiographical thing, which basically puts his life in as though he were a British diplomat and spy, and tells the story of his dad. And his dad was a complete wrong and effectively a con man, and he doesn't really, and he's kind of has this English boarding school accent, but because his dad was constantly moving him around boarding schools and just coming up with the money at the right time to keep him there and all of that kind of stuff, and he's just got this like kind of stranger than fiction life. And then throughout it, and this is a kind of, I like people like this in general, he basically got really famous and really rich really quickly, and was then like, fuck off, I'm going to do what I want for the rest of my life. And I love that, and he's kind of, he has effectively done that, where he was kind of on the other side of a lot of on the other side of a lot of the kind of literary authors on the Salman Rushdie thing, and is basically says and does whatever the fuck he wants to the age of, like, he is 85 now. And he's had a bit of a kind of Forrest Gumpy life, really, touching all of these different
I know what you mean.
bits of really famous. Like, I think the first thing he said when he did this talk, there was two really funny things he said. One was, someone said quite an innocuous question, and he said, well, I once talked about that with Graham Greene, as though it was like the most natural thing in the world, which I thought was a very kind of ballsy move. And the other thing, which I thought was funny and maybe less endearing, but he said, yes, so my two sons have set up this production company, and they've been doing rather well, because they did The Night Manager, and that did rather well, and now they're doing a couple of others of mine. And I wanted to kind of stand up and say, oh, so your sons, who've got unlimited access to the most exciting IP of the last 100 years, they're doing all right, are they, David? What a surprise. How did they manage that? But yeah, legend nonetheless. And also, he signed my book for me, and I did very fanboyishly, like, went up to him and asked him to sign my book. And bless him, he's old and he had to sit down, but he did it. And he was very nice and gracious, and
That's very cool. He is such a cracking choice for a first guest. What a way to kickstart your party. John le Carré with his stories. Your next guest's done a bit of spying himself, Jake, actually, albeit slightly different context. I think we could sit here and talk just for hours about your second guest. He's absolutely fascinating. You're inviting Leeds United head coach Marcelo Bielsa.
Yeah.
Why are you inviting the man known as El Loco to your dinner party?
That's enough, isn't it? That's it. Next. I'm a big football fan, and also I happen to be from a big family of Leeds supporters, so I've been particularly close to the story over the last couple of years. I was aware, just by being a football fan, of Marcelo Bielsa before he became the manager of Leeds, and his kind of exacting standards or whatever. But over the course of the last 2 years, basically fallen in love with him and his kind of doomed pursuit of perfection. I guess there's like a bit of a theme going here already. I've just realised.
I like that. We'll come to that later.
But yeah, he's a fascinating man. He's from a family. He's from a very kind of establishment family in Argentina. I think his brother is like the ambassador to another country, another South American country. His dad was, I think, a famous professor. I might be wrong about that. He himself, I think, is a qualified lawyer. Like, he's just from this really amazing family, and he's like almost the kind of idiot black sheep of the family, because he's one of the best football managers of all time. I like. Are you a big football fan, Connor? I can't remember.
I am a football fan. Yeah, I am. Although I have to admit that I guess, like what you'd said, aware of Bielsa as a football manager, aware that players who he manages are expected to give everything for him. But until I kind of read about him today in preparation for this, I actually didn't really realize the extent to which he takes that to like so far beyond the logical extreme. He is like, I mean, I read he turned to someone after a game once and said, "Have you ever thought about killing yourself after a loss?" Like, and this demonstrates like an almost unbelievable intensity. He asked a young defender if he'd be willing to cut off one of his fingers if it meant winning the game the next day. That young defender went on to score the first goal in a 4-3 win. So obviously that intensity kind of did a job on him. But Marcelo Bielsa, reading about him has just blown my mind, Jake. Like I can't fathom what a fascinating man he is.
Yeah.
You said that you didn't know much about him and you've kind of discovered more about him. Give us a sense, if people are listening who don't know who Marcelo Bielsa is, give us a sense of who he is, what he does, and why he is El Loco.
Yeah, well, I think you've got some anecdotes there that do get to the core of him a little bit, and he is by any definition a lunatic. But I think underneath it all as well, what I've been really struck by since he became the manager of Leeds is how invested in the community he is, like in a very tangible way. He lives in a 1-bedroom flat above a sweet shop in the village of Wetherby, where he earns millions a year, obviously, much of which he gives to charitable causes, as I understand it. And there's a really famous picture. I was actually at the game, weirdly. The famous picture of him after Leeds lost 1-0 away to QPR at the kind of 3/4 point of last season. So not the season just gone, the season before that, when they famously kind of stumbled when they looked like they would be certain to be promoted after 15 years and then didn't make it. And he's in the tunnel and he's just like, after the game, they lost 1-0. QPR were playing really badly at the time. They should have won. And it was kind of the beginning of the end of the title bid, basically. And he's just like slumped on his own in the tunnel with his head in his hands. And that to me is like, he felt it as deeply as a lot of the fans feel it and truly understands the kind of link between a football club, which are increasingly talked about in kind of franchise terms or as pieces of property to kind of launder the reputations and money of very corrupt companies or corrupt nations. And he understands the true link between the community in a very romantic and probably doomed way, as I mentioned, between the community and the people that represent them in the football club. And he lives those values. I think, again, maybe to go back right to the start, I'm increasingly attracted to very resolute and rigid values. Basically, I think that in a kind of increasingly complex and insane world, I'm attracted to people that say, this is how I'm going to live my life and here's what I'm going to do. Do you know what I mean? I'm not going to just
I see that
window dressing. And he I think he has like a phrase where he says, like, it doesn't matter what you do, it matters how you do it. And so part of the reason why some of his teams or the theorize that they've come up short in the past is that he demands they play in a very specific, very high octane way, which is not conducive to playing 50 games across the course of the season. So they always kind of run out of steam, apart from this year when they pissed the league by 10 points. So,
and this is known as the Bielsa burnout.
Yes, and the style of play is known as Bielsa ball, and it makes all other styles of football look shit and boring. And it's just remarkable. And so for him to say, no, this is what we do, and we're going to stick to it, and we're always going to do it because that it represents our community and it makes them feel happy, because it doesn't, it's not useful for them to come to the game and for us to win at the weekend when they spend loads of money. It's useful for them to come to the game and enjoy it and see that we give everything, like they are one and the same. And it's a silly, romantic, beautiful idea. But
it is, but on the flip side of it, maybe not on the flip side of it, but it lives difficultly alongside being a man of such values, like you've said, because after he left the Argentina job in 2004, he lived in a monastery with nuns for 3 months without a TV or phone, and it said that he studied football for 3 years after he stood down from the Argentina job, feeling guilty that they'd only won a gold medal at
Yeah.
the Olympics, and that was his guilt that made him do that. But the one of the most outstanding moments, kind of in British football in the last decade, one of the most outstanding moments was the infamous occasion when he demanded that he allow Aston Villa to score an equaliser, and this made fans furious. It was a controversial decision. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it was like towards the end of the season, and Leeds had kind of effectively were basically like couldn't get promoted automatically anymore, but could still very much. It would depend on whether they won the remaining games, where they would come in the playoffs, and all of that kind of thing. It was just there was an outside chance they could still get promoted automatically as well. And one of his players, Tyler Roberts, kind of played on when there was clearly an Aston Villa player down injured, and they played on and they basically scored. Mateus Klich scored a goal, who's a Portuguese, Polish central midfielder. Should never have happened, and they gained a credible advantage by the Aston Villa players not being kind of ready to play. All hell broke loose. There was like fighting on the pitch, whatever, and he, in the aftermath of it, demanded that the Leeds players allow Aston Villa to score unopposed, which was remarkable. And even his players didn't want to do it. The defender Pontus Jansson, who's a big Swedish centre half and a bit of a prat, actually, decided that he didn't really want to let this happen. And so he's the person that does that. I mean, he's also the person that sent someone to watch Derby train, which was a basically ineffectual bit of spying that wasn't going to give him really much of an edge. But he is, again, by any definition, a lunatic. So he kind of imposed this thing. So he said in a way that he wanted to prove to himself he'd left kind of no stone unturned because he feels so guilty when they lose, which is like just mad stuff.
But he acknowledged that was his decision and refused to let the club pay the fine. He personally paid the £200,000 FA fine. He is this man of extraordinary moral certainty, I guess. Or he lives absolutely by his code. And to kind of say he's meticulous in detail almost does him a disservice because he is totally obsessed. Do you think it's healthy?
Is it? It's not. There's a short answer that it's not. He's a 60-year-old man, bless him. He should be home with a glass of Malbec. And not. During lockdown, there was a rumour or some kind of substantiated claim that he watched 20 hours of footage of a Leeds central midfielder called Alfie McCalmont, who plays for the under-23s, which is like a bit of a pressure to put on poor Alfie as well. He's probably just finished his A-levels, bless him. And so, yeah, that would be my fear. From a dinner party perspective, maybe we wouldn't get onto the kind of great moral conundrums of our time, and maybe he'd just want to talk about football because I suspect that he is so obsessed that he doesn't know what else to talk about. But it's a risk I'm willing to take, basically.
What do you think it would be like to be managed by him? I mean, you've had managers, albeit not as a professional footballer, to the best of my knowledge, unless I'm wrong. What do you think, as a personality, he would be like to have as your boss?
I think he's one of those people that, from what I understand, again, just from what I've read, he's a bit like detached, and you almost want him to make him love you. Do you know what I mean? He doesn't give his affection very freely, and therefore they all like run through brick walls for him. So I think I'm quite susceptible to that. Actually, I think I'm someone who as someone that stands in front of strangers and begs them for approval, I think I would be. I think I would be susceptible to that style of management, actually. So I imagine. I mean, there is when he became the manager, there was like a part of it. There was only two ways it ever was going to go. He was going to leave within 2 weeks, or he was going to be the best Leeds manager ever. And that really relied on whether the players kind of rose to this challenge of being like, yeah, we love him and we're going to go through brick walls for him, or they were like, this bloke's weighing me every 2 days. What is he on? So yeah, but I think I'd be up for it.
I mean, as I said before, didn't know much about him today. My jaw has just lifted off the floor in time to talk to you. I I could talk to you about Bielsa all day. There's really only time for one more thing, and I can't leave this unsaid. Can you explain to listeners why he got the nickname El Loco? Do you know this story?
I might not know this one. Is it the one about Maurizio Pochettino's legs?
No, that's a great story. Tell us that one very quickly.
Well, this is fucking amazing. And Maurizio Pochettino tells it in a very nonplussed way, as though it's completely normal, which makes me even more funny. So basically, Maurizio Pochettino, the former Argentina defender and Tottenham manager, was a really good footballer. They wanted to sign him for the team where Marcelo Bielsa was working. Marcelo Bielsa drove to his house, which was in the sticks somewhere, got there inexplicably at 2 a.m, God knows why, and said to his mum, "You've got to wake him up because we want to see if he's going to be a footballer." She did it, which is always, I've always found questionable. She said, "Yeah, come in, strange old man," and he went in to his bedroom, woke him up, took one look at his legs, and said, "Yeah, he's got the legs of a footballer," and drove back. And he was right.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is loco.
That is
but
mad,
the
isn't it?
story that I read today, which is apparently the reason why he got the nickname El Loco, was that when he was manager of Newell's in Argentina, 20 incensed, like, ultra fans were furious and came to his house to protest whatever decision he'd made. Bielsa walks out of his house holding a grenade and tells them to fuck off and get off his property.
I'll believe it, Connor. I'll level with you. I believe it.
I mean, this is a next level man.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, quite rightly, he got the nickname El Loco because he threatened fans on his property with a grenade, as you do.
There's a famous American sports writer called Bill Simmons, and he's got this thing which he calls the Tyson zone, which is basically for different, less palatable reasons. If anyone told you anything about Mike Tyson, you would believe it. That's and so he says that there are sporting personalities that enter the Tyson zone where you would believe anything. And I would accept that he had a grenade, a rocket launcher, he was on a tank. I would believe any of it. I think he's firmly in that league of lunatics, but in a much more crucially lovable way than Mike Tyson, I think.
That is so true. That is, I will be thinking about the Tyson zone immediately as well. Roy Keane came into my head there as well. He's another one in the Tyson zone.
Definitely in there.
I could talk to you about Bielsa all night, but we've got to move on. Your third guest might not be as intense as Marcelo Bielsa, but he does play intense characters very well. You're inviting the fantastic actor Patterson Joseph to your dinner party. For those who might not know who Patterson Joseph is, remind us who he is.
Well, I know him, and this is the reason I've invited him. I know him as Johnson from Peep Show, and I know that, and in one of those classic British. This is a classic British TV thing where you go someone who's a kind of not quite a lead part in a sitcom or something relatively lowbrow, you go, "Oh, what does he do?" And then you look him up, and they're like one of the most accomplished Shakespearean actors of their generation, or something like that. That's like every British actor ever. He's like, "Oh, is he like the third orc in Game of Thrones or whatever?" And it's like, yeah, and he played King Lear last year at the Donmar as well. So Patterson Joseph, he has got a much more accomplished career than I would give him credit for, I think. But that's how I associate.
Yeah.
With it. Also, why
he loves that people associate him with that. I watched a thing earlier where he was asked, "Does it annoy you that people approach you and just call you Johnson?" He's like, "Why would that bother me? Like, people love this character, and I love this character." And I'm just delighted that people kind of engaged with him.
Well, I've got a very narrow reason for inviting him, basically, which is that about once a year, I just watch all of Peep Show from kind of start to finish, and it's always so good. And basically, I just want to have a chat with him where and it's kind of a professional interest in as much as he's clearly brought something to that character that they did not know was there when they started writing it. Do you know what I mean? Like he has performed some kind of alchemy to those words that take Johnson from a very limited, boring kind of boss pastiche to this very, very strange, funny, like hilariously funny character, and I would just love to know how he does it, basically, because it's like a magic trick. It's like watching a magic trick. And it's he's just so funny, and
That is
so
such a
memorable.
brilliant point. That is such an excellent point, and you're absolutely right. There's no way, however good the writing is on Peep Show, you're absolutely right that he brought something unwritten and that couldn't have been imagined to the character. That's so true. Would you want Patterson Joseph to be there, or would you actually really want Johnson at your dinner party?
Maybe you've got to the real number of it there. Well, maybe there's no way he's going through the evening without kind of reprising some kind of "that's bollocks, Mark" or something like that. There's no, I'm gonna do that, especially if I've been kind of on the wine while I've been trying to cook, and then I'm a bit loose. Then there's no way he's getting away without that. Or going Liam Kendrick in the house, which is another really funny one. So
I
maybe
watched the clip earlier of when he real life indecent proposed Jez.
Yeah.
And he wanted to offer him, what is it, like £532 to sleep with his girlfriend?
Yeah, and it's just like I think what I really love is as the series goes on. I think he's in every series, and he is, like I say, a more traditional character in the beginning, and you just basically see him having more and more fun with it, and that's kind of a function of watching them all back to back as well, and watching them rather than kind of across the time that they're spread out of. And by the end, he's so weird. He does these weird little vocal tics and things like that. Where like in the kind of penultimate series, they're at the New Year's Eve episode, and they're at his house, and he offers Mark a drink, and he says, "What about a long cold neck bottle of Bud? Hubba bubba." And it is the strangest thing ever. And like, I really like Peep Show, but I'm not like a proper Peep Show head. But I'm wholly in for Alan Johnson, because every time he's on the screen, it's just like this. Something really funny is and increasingly very strange. It's just like I don't know. I don't get to a kind of quote-a-thon, but I could do that.
You just want a live performance by Patterson Joseph,
exactly.
of kind of Johnson's best bits. It's I mean, you mentioned earlier he is also like a supremely talented Shakespearean actor, and does a lot of stuff that isn't comedy as well. He does a lot of drama too. He also said last year that he started writing his first novel. So it kind of goes back to like what I was asking you earlier, that this thing I'm obsessed with, asking creative people about all their kind of the multifarious nature of their creativity and all the different things that they want to do.
That's the scary aspect of creative, like, because you look at him and you go, someone that talented, scary talented, and like he's had an incredible career. He's had an amazing career, but he's not. To me, he should be in major Hollywood films. Do you know what I mean? Like leading man in Hollywood. And maybe there's, unfortunately, I guess, some kind of some biases and some privileges in the industry that he doesn't have access to. I don't know, but like I just that kind of terrifies me about creativity and about all of the ways in which it's kind of gate kept by commercial interest in a way. Because every so often, like a newcomer will pop up in something and they've never been in anything before, and that's always like, wow, they finally got their chance. And the scary thing to me is like, what if they didn't? Do you know what I mean? They're so good, and they've been on Holby City for the last 5 years or whatever, and terrifying. But I'll definitely read that novel.
Well, yeah. I mean, what would you be interested in hearing about all the different projects that he'd worked on? Because he strikes me as someone who'd just be very interesting to talk to. Or would you really just want to grill him on Peep Show? Because he seems to love talking about that.
Well, I think I'd be more interested, not in the project so much, or even Peep Show so much, but in his process, right? Because there are certain people, and I think he's the perfect, like, kind of Premier League example of this, that turn everything they touch into like hilarity, basically, or like they just so perfectly understand their performance and their persona and are so comfortable and they make these incredibly insightful and interesting choices in everything that they do. And so I'd be interested in how he does that. I suspect there'll be some kind of horribly scary answer, which is like, I don't know, basically. It's just kind of in me. But like people like him, people like Tim Key is very like that as well.
Yeah.
The American actor John Early, I don't know if you know him.
I
He's
don't know.
Kate Ballant, who is his kind of comedy partner. Tracy Morgan in 30 Rock is
From
just like
30 Rock, yeah.
it's just like John Cairns as well. I think as a stand-up comedian is very like that as well. It's just something in them. They just make the perfect choice, and they can turn a nondescript word or not something that's a punchline just into something hilarious with a raise of the eyebrow or whatever. And so I'd like to talk to him more about like how do you do that more than anything.
Yeah.
Like
And as
asking.
you say, it probably is that thing where it's just like, for some people it's a cliche, I know, but some people do just have funny bones. Like some people just get what's funny and can instinctively, without thinking, just embody something so funny without even knowing why they've done that. It's just the automatic choice, and it's
Definitely.
solid gold. And I think you're absolutely onto something with him there.
Yeah.
Interestingly, he was a chef
Was
apparently
he?
before becoming an actor. Yeah.
So I've invited two. Oh, I guess
Well,
I'm
which brings us
spoiling the next choice.
very nicely onto, you have just said you've invited two chefs, Patterson Joseph, actor and chef. Your next guest, brilliant choice. Her knowledge of and appreciation for food is infectious. You're inviting Samin Nosrat.
Yeah. I think infection
Brilliant.
is a really good word. Actually, I wouldn't have thought to think of that word, but it's a really good word. Yeah, like for those, I guess for people that don't know her, she wrote a book called Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, and which was a really big selling cookbook. But I don't know about you, but I first became aware of her because of the Netflix
Yep.
program of the same name.
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, similar to Patterson Joseph in a way, actually, where I like my food and I can cook a little bit, but not really. Like I'm fine. But I like watching cookery shows, and especially the big glossy Netflix ones where they're like, "We're in Tokyo now, we're in Lisbon," like those ones.
Yeah.
And that would probably be my ideal creative bucket list. Actually, if only I knew anything about fucking olive oil or whatever. Like my girlfriend and I were talking about like, can you imagine when they got her in the room for the screen test or whatever, after like she's written this incredible book, she's a great writer, we know that much. I don't think she'd really done that much on telly before, or maybe some YouTube stuff, whatever. Can you imagine when they got her in the screen test and were like, all right, pretend you're talking to this woman about making olive oil or whatever, and she is the most infectious, joyful, engrossing television personality I think I might maybe have ever seen. I don't know, is that hyperbolic?
I really think you're onto something. I actually I only got round to watching the first episode of it last night. It's been on my list for so long.
Yeah.
And then when you obviously said you were inviting her, I wanted to watch an episode, see what she was about. But I really liked the look of the series. And I realized that I must have watched that trailer for it like 10 times over the last few years when I've been looking for a new series to watch. And I only realized last night when I was watching the trailer, like I laughed out loud watching a trailer for a cookery show. And it was just like a release of joy.
Yeah.
I laughed out loud at a point when, it's the point in the trailer, you'll have seen it in the series, when she's eating something and she says it's the spiciest thing she's ever eaten and she's laughing.
Yeah.
And I laughed.
I know. It's
And
mad, isn't
she
it?
just exudes this, like a warmth that oh my God, I would give anything to have. Like she is
got a bit
so
of that in you.
immediately likable.
I think you've got a bit of that. I've always said that about your emceeing style, the warmth in it and your openness and camaraderie. You've got a bit of that in it. You don't eat as much olives on stage, thankfully.
I will take both of those things as compliments.
I do honestly think there's a bit of overlap there.
Oh,
and
mate, you're far, far too generous there.
it's like you say, if she starts laughing and it makes you laugh and feel happy.
Yeah.
I think I'm talking about olive oil a lot more than I had intended, but she's tasting olive oil and she
Uh-huh.
tastes this olive oil, and her eyes just like pop. They just like go really wide, and
Yeah.
it's like, I don't know. In a way, it's like, oh, it's really simple. Get someone who's not a dickhead and is really lovely and knows loads about what they're talking about, and just turn the cameras on. It's not hard,
Yeah.
really, is it?
100%. But I mean, she is, as you said, like she's a unique kind of talent. I read an article earlier, or a bit of an article earlier from Rolling Stone, and for me, like this opening to this article just is so perfect. It says, every time Samin Nosrat laughs, it's like someone's opened a bottle of champagne. It pops in a bright round burst and then leaves a delightful fizz in the air, the lingering feeling of everyone within earshot smiling. Like
That's
that
class.
is that is perfect. That
Yeah, it's good as
describes
well.
her personality combined with her knowledge and her passion. It's just the perfect vehicle for a show that's also shot so beautifully. Every frame of that show
Yeah,
is
it's
a
amazing.
piece of art.
And to be fair as well, we talked about a lot about her being on the telly, but the book, I bought the book after the fact, and
Oh
again,
yeah,
not really a cook, don't really know what I'm kind of doing, but the book in
yeah.
and of itself is brilliantly written as well, and I think it's just one of those kind of communicators
It's a
that is just like,
fascinating, it's a fascinating idea. The premise
yeah,
of the book and the subsequent series
yeah, for
that
sure,
all good food is essentially made up of these four components: salt, fat, acid, and heat.
yeah.
It's an extraordinary theory. It sounds simple, um, but what a thing to explore. I mean, having read the book and that kind of thing, is there a specific aspect of her work that you would want to dig deeper into, or a kind of area of discussion that you would like to explore with her?
I would like some feedback on the food, I think, and again, I think she'd be very nice about the food without,
Yeah.
we should be exacting, but if you had Ramsay round or whatever, it wouldn't be very nice. But I think she'd be nice. Um, I think the thing she's kind of increasingly famous for is just like, however much salt you think you need to season something with, like double it, and then it's probably about that. And so I think
Yes.
I would like to ask her a bit about that, because there have been some times recently where I've thought, I'm following what Salmon told me to do here, and I've made food completely inedible. I think I'm not quite getting it right, but yeah. So I would like to ask her about the kind of the seasoning and salting, because it's not quite gelling for me.
Yeah, it's but
Also,
it is. It's
vibes. She's just great vibes as well. Just
She
whoa,
really
just
is. I mean, obviously, like comedy and food are very different areas to operate in. But I guess her as a presenter is a type of performance.
yeah.
Is there anything that you think you could learn from her as a performer that you would
100.
like to apply to your comedy?
Yeah, I mean, she's completely herself. She's completely kind of vulnerable and lacking in self-awareness, which is I think the key to it. I mean, I've done very few things. Me and my mate started making like a filmed series, like 2 minute videos about football on YouTube recently,
Hmm.
and that by definition, the people who are good at doing things like that make it look easy. And it's not easy to be completely natural when someone turns a camera on and points at you. It's weird.
Yeah, yeah,
It's a weird thing to do. Um, and she's just somehow, I don't know how, I think there's probably something about, she doesn't seem like an anxious person. She seems happy. And I think that helps.
yeah,
And she seems at peace with herself and with who she is in a very open way where yeah, she doesn't seem self-conscious at all, and it comes across as, like you say, it expresses itself as joy and openness and happiness. And so I think I would like to understand again how she does that. I suspect, as with Patterson, she will go, well, I'm just me, I'm just supremely talented, why don't you try it?
yeah.
But yeah,
God,
I'd like
that's
to ask her
such
about that.
a light bulb moment when you said that. That makes so much sense. That what it is exactly that. She seems so comfortable
Yeah,
with who she is,
for sure.
and that's it. That's what being at ease with yourself looks like.
Definitely. And she's so lacking in any judgment as well of anyone
Yeah.
around her, which is something I try to work on, where I basically judge everyone within the first 10 seconds. Um, and what do you know? They always come out less favourably than good old moral me. Um, but I don't really know the like. She meets all these people throughout the series. Some of whom she's clearly met for like the first time. Some of whom maybe she knows a bit. With all of them, she seems to have this incredible understanding and is very warm towards them, and clearly has no judgment or perception of them whatsoever.
She
and
speaks
just
to everyone like they're an old friend.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful quality.
Yeah. Whereas I tend to speak to everyone like they're an enemy I haven't made yet. I want to be more like her.
That is, I mean, she's such a terrific guest. She also, she studied English at uni, so there's another little thing in common you guys have.
Career and stuff like that as well, from what I read in this book. Yeah. So I think there'd be a lot of overlap. I'm not sure how she'd get on with Marcello, but I think she'd be quite up.
But I think even seeing the way she speaks with everyone,
true,
I would trust that she would be warm enough and engaging enough that even Marcello might forget about football for 15 minutes.
Second, talk about how to season some steaks or something. Yeah. You're probably right. She can win round anyone. I'm sold.
She's such a great guest. What I love about doing this podcast and having these conversations is every now and then I'll read about someone or I'll talk to someone like you about a guest of their choice, and they immediately go from being someone I've known nothing about to someone who I have a burning need to have at my own dream dinner party. Yeah. And I think Sami Nosrat is absolutely.
When are you going to do your one? You're going to have to like episode 100 or something. You have to get someone.
I think so. Yeah, I'll treat myself if I can do 100 episodes. Then I'll get you to come back and interview
lovely.
Me. That's the deal.
I'm up for
that. Your final guest, Jake, is someone that I kind of know almost nothing about actually, but it's a name that I know, and the very, very little that I do know about this person, I know that he's a bit of a legend. He's a fascinating addition to such a varied and interesting group of people. You're inviting Joy Division frontman Ian Curtis. And I'm going to have to ask your forgiveness in advance, because as I said, like I know almost nothing about him, so some of my questions I think are going to come across as like a little bit facile. But what am I missing out on by not having Ian Curtis in my cultural sphere?
It's a good question. I think I was obsessed with the music of Joy Division, which is basically Ian Curtis, like the lyrics of Ian Curtis, effectively when I was like 16, the kind of sixth form age, when you love things in the passionate way that only a sixth former can.
Yeah.
And I thought the music was kind of like nothing that I'd ever heard before. I was a bit hesitant to put him in, really, because it is a bit of a sixth former choice. But I feel I kind of got to the point where I was like, I wouldn't be being honest, or do you know what I mean? I'd be picking someone a bit more cool or a bit more, but because he is a relatively, I guess you might say, like basic choice in some way, especially for a gloomy 29-year-old man. But but yeah, I think the music, what you're missing out on, I think the music is incredible and is insane, but I think more than that, you're missing out on the kind of, I think the word legend that you use is an interesting one, because he very sadly killed himself when he was very young, and has effectively become this icon or this kind of myth. And I think that was probably what spoke to me a lot as a late teenager as well, kind of early adulthood as well, was this sense of him being this like folkloric figure when actually he was just a bloke from Macclesfield, really. And so I think that's kind of what you're missing out on, is he's truly they intentionally, the people around him, and also just by virtue of the fact that he was so brilliant, made him into this kind of mythic figure after his death, and so you always feel a bit like you never really understand him. So I think that's kind of what you're missing out on a bit, really.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, he very tragically committed suicide at the age of 23, and I have to admit, like, reading about his life today, like, genuinely made me feel really, really sad. But I have no knowledge of his musical output. Is he someone that brings you joy?
Yes, the music does bring me joy because the music is so incredible. What I always find amazing as well is that you remind yourself, if you listen to the music, the idea that a 19, 20, 21-year-old, 22-year-old wrote this music is laughable because he
Yeah.
connects with ideas and with things that I think someone double his age maybe wouldn't really have much understanding of, and writes about them with incredible clarity.
Hmm.
What I also think, he kind of brings me joy in a bit as well, because I think he was a lot more normal than he let on. And I think he was aware of what it meant to be a rock star and what that mythic status went. And I think very sadly, I've read basically everything there is to read about them because I was a little nerd. But uh, I think that might have played a role in him killing himself as well, which I think is really sad.
Yeah.
Um, but and it's really, yeah, and I think it is really sad, and there's no way around that. But I that the notion of someone who was like this invested in his art and they had such a strong sense of himself, I do think is a joyful thing. And I think the idea that even though he did kill himself, which is really sad because he had such a long life ahead of him,
Hmm.
I think the idea that people still listen to the music, and I always think there's probably, like you say, like you're never further than 6 feet away from a rat in London. I think you're
Yeah. Yeah.
never further than like 10 feet away from like a 16-year-old who's just discovered Joy Division. Um, and,
I like that. Yeah.
and that brings me joy as well, that music or art can last that long over
Yeah.
the course of years.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it's funny you said that you've kind of read everything there is to read about them because well, I don't know what was the exact phrase you used because you were a nerd, was it?
Yeah,
Or
a little weird nerd boy.
a little weird nerd boy. Well, when I
Obsessed
was
with this gloomy
reading
band.
about Ian Curtis, he apparently, well, to quote his Wikipedia article, sorry that I used Wikipedia as a source, but he was described as bookish and intelligent as a child, like writing poetry. He developed interests in philosophy, literature, and poetry. And I see a lot of overlap there with like the areas that and some of the topics you like to talk about on stage. You touch on philosophy and literature in a big way in your stand up. Is that an area that if you had him at your dinner party there, you would enjoy discussing with him, do you think?
I think so. I mean, he definitely is like the kind of the original archetype for like the kind of the bloke, or the from a relatively normal, like from a community or a place where it's not really rated that highly to be into like poetry and music and art or whatever, who very self-consciously then is into all of that stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I think that was definitely part of the hero worship when I was growing up, was like I kind of had that sense of myself, or that view of myself, which is, I think, where thousands of other, like especially young men and probably young women as well, associate with him. So I definitely would like to talk to him about that. I wonder if now he would be someone who's quite outdated in his understanding or view of art, in that I think there was a really kind of rigid hierarchy, in the same way that a lot of Joy Division fans have a very rigid hierarchy about what constitutes good art. I think he
Hmm.
might have he might be behind the times on that. Like when I was a teenager, um, good music was denoted by the seriousness of the music, and the seriousness of the music was denoted by how much the person singing it wanted to kill themselves. And
Yeah,
uh, he
yeah.
clearly wanted to kill himself a great deal, and therefore his music was the best music, which I now know is not true, because some of Katy Perry's songs are bangers and she doesn't want to kill herself, as far as I'm aware. Um, but I think in a similar way, he probably had a view of art and literature and stuff where there were these kind of big, strong men at the top of the totem pole who
Hmm.
wrote about the big, serious questions of life, because he was obsessed with like Ballard, and he was obsessed with lots of writers like that, beat poets and Rimbaud and like
Hmm.
Dylan and stuff like that. So, and especially then with Bowie and stuff like that as well. And I think for the better, art there's not really as much of a distinction between kind of selling out now, or kind of commercial art can still kind of be valid as well, like that kind of movement in music called poptimism in the late 2000s that kind of posited, rightly I think, that like Beyonce is just as valid as Bob Dylan, right? It's just as important.
Yeah.
And so I think he might be a bit behind the times. He might be a bit out of step there, but I would still like to chat to him about it nonetheless. I just worry that he might be a really gloomy bastard while Samin's trying to talk about seasoning the chicken.
Well, that is, yeah, I mean, a lot of his musical output and his lyrics are kind of filled with some quite morose imagery.
Yeah.
And that is when we talked about the risk earlier
Yeah,
of the night
definitely.
going off the rails. I think we were both probably thinking, I hope Ian Curtis
Yeah, I hope
isn't
Ian
difficult to be
plays
around.
Yeah, there were some regrettable early in Joy Division's career allusions to fascistic imagery in their artwork and stuff. I hope he doesn't start talking about that. They're named after. No, Ian, be quiet. So yeah, but
Is
again,
there-
I think from what I've read about him, of people that knew him, he was just like he just liked going to the pub and smoking loads of fags, and then he would go home and write these kind of insane lyrics about insane. I mean that in a pejoratively good way
Yeah.
about death and existentialism. So hopefully just get him on the normal pubby days. I don't know.
Is there anything about his creative output that has like directly inspired you, or is it so far removed from the area or the style in which you talk about things? Is it just a case of admiring him rather than being influenced by him?
I think I've probably gone the other way now. Where they were, and I don't think any of the members of the band and the people that then went on to be in New Order, I don't think they actually were. I think there was a big gap basically between the iconography and the kind of mystique that they had in their kind of public persona and the kind of probably quite normal idiotic men that they were, if you know what I mean. And I think that like, I've probably gone the other way. When I first started, I probably wanted to have that kind of serious posture or pose, if you know what I mean, like in public, like in how I performed or how I spoke, if I ever did stuff like this, which I do very rarely. And I think as I've gone on, I've just realised that that's relatively, again, I think quite old fashioned now. Do you know what I mean? I think if you think about, I think there's a good thing about mystique, and I think there's a good thing about not being completely open, and I think that is a part of good art to a certain extent. But I think you can maintain that without adopting this insanely like morose or depressed posture as a mark of your own seriousness, I think.
It's fascinating to hear you talking about him, and yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, looking at your guests now as a collective, so you got John le Carre, Marcelo Bielsa, Patterson Joseph, Sami Nosrat, and Ian Curtis.
Yeah.
The thing that I've come to love doing in this podcast is at the end trying to figure out what's the kind of common thread that goes through the group. What is the thing that connects them all in your mind? You mentioned earlier values when you were talking about Le Carre, and it's something that very strongly came out with Bielsa.
Yeah.
And I think comes out with Sami Nosrat a little bit as well. But also like intensity is something that really struck me about this group of people. Like Bielsa, unbelievably intense. Ian Curtis, very intense. Sami Nosrat, like intense, but on the opposite end of the spectrum. Patterson Joseph plays intensity so well. But what for you do you think, if one exists, is that kind of common thread?
I don't know. I think there's a bit of it. I think the two things you mentioned are really insightful actually, and really appropriate. But I wonder if the other thing is there's an element of like originality. I think to all of them. Of kind of being themselves and kind of being truly themselves and being very original. In a really strong way. So I think there might be a bit of that as well, because I feel like, I mean, I might be again imposing this too much on her, but I feel like Sami Nosrat has basically been like, yeah, I've seen what everyone else has done as a TV chef, and I'm not going to do any of it, and it's going to be way better how I do it. And I think there's something kind of a bit magical about that as well. So yeah, I think maybe a bit of originality. They're all quite singular, I think. Like I said about
definitely
as well, he doesn't give a solitary fuck as far as I'm aware. So but yeah, I think maybe they've all got a bit of that in them to a certain extent.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's absolutely valid. It's such a fascinating group of guests. Like one thing that struck me as well is as a comedian, Patterson Joseph plays comedic characters very well, but you've not invited any comedians there, which I thought was interesting.
No, I did. I did toy with the idea of inviting Ricky Gervais because I absolutely loved Ricky Gervais. It was basically Ian Curtis and Ricky Gervais when I was a kid, or was a kid, 16 or whatever. And I was obsessed with The Office. But I think he's a twat now, and so I'd be interested. I'd be interested to have a conversation with him about that and about trying to understand why, as a kind of 100 millionaire, you can be so angry about transgender people. But I was So he was the one that kind of came closest to the list, but there wasn't really much joy in that.
That's interesting. See, I thought you'd invite Ian Curtis instead.
You got me there, actually. But actually, I would be excited to talk to him, whereas I would kind of be bristling for a fight with Gervais, I think.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I 100% agree.
And not to be that idiot as well, but like a lot of the comedians that I really love, I am now lucky enough to be like the middle spot when they're headlining. So it's like, I think you've got 5 people, living or dead. You may as well go for Ian Curtis rather than you can just go and see John Cairns down the Soho Theatre whenever you want. Well, you used to be able to.
But, hopefully, again, very soon we'll be able to do that.
Fingers crossed.
That's such a good rationale and a great group of guests. So the only thing left to decide now, Jake, is what would you be cooking for these people? You've already said that you kind of like cooking and that you enjoy it. Obviously, the pressure's on with having a chef there, but I think you could, put shit sprinkled with sugar on a plate and she'd find some positive in it.
She'd find something nice to say about it.
She'd be like, "Oh, you've put that on the plate so nicely. The presentation is ace."
It's under seasoned. The shit's under seasoned, but other than that, great.
But what would be on the menu for this extraordinary group of people?
Well, this is I decided on something that I cooked a couple of times during lockdown, partly inspired by, I think this is cooked in one of the episodes of the TV show we talked about. I would cook like a slow cooked pork ragu. Don't think there's any veggies in there. Maybe don't think Marcello is. So I think that would be all right. There's kind of 2 things there. One is very delicious. It's really nice. And it's like you can't really get it wrong to a certain extent. And 2, because it's kind of slow cooked, you don't have to be like mincing around in the kitchen trying to get stuff done. Which I always hate when I'm doing a dinner party or when I'm at someone else's dinner party. So yeah, that could just be in the slow cooker, just like 10 hours. That's all gravy. And then I can kind of, I can be lighting Ian cigarettes and asking him why he's so sad.
I think that's such a great dish when you consider as well, not only who you've got there, but where you are. Like if you're kind of in the middle of the Scottish Highlands, I'm thinking a lovely, comforting ragu, some bottles of red wine on the table.
Yeah, some cans of Tennant 3 and get or whatever. Yeah, exactly. That's what I wanted. I wanted that kind of hearty, like, let's all get stuck into this ragu and let's talk about values. Come on, let's have it out.
Oh, it sounds absolutely fantastic. It's the kind of, I think your selection of guests is the group of people that collectively I've known the least about.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, like, there have always been a couple of people that some people have chosen that I've been like, oh, yeah, I've seen some of their work or I know some of their work. But actually with this group, there was very little that I knew about them. And so I was a little bit, I was very interested to hear why they meant something to you. But I did feel that a little bit detached from the collective of people that you gathered. Like when I've had people in the past choose people like Jim Henson, who I just adore.
Right.
Like I was already really excited and thinking, God, I would love to be at that party, but I wasn't sure what this one was going to be like. And we've got to the end of it, and you have totally sold me on it. I mean,
on your round.
It sounds like such a fascinating night.
You can come along. You can help me do the ragu. You can be on the pasta.
Even if I just have to sit in the kitchen while you guys are all eating in the dining room,
I think I
to be a
might need
fly
you
in the
to
wall.
damp down some of the arguments and stuff as well. Just step in with your warmth and generosity and be like, that's
Yeah.
enough. Put down
I'll
the
take
knife.
the grenades off Bielsa and just say, no, you can get it back when you're leaving, Marcelo.
Yeah. You might need two people too to hold him back. Yeah.
Well, Jake, I have loved this conversation. Thank you so
Me too.
much for sharing your dinner party with me. For our lovely listeners who might want to hear more from you, see more from you, we mentioned the Edinburgh Unlocked audiobook earlier. You can get that from Audible, or I'm sure you can get it from other places as well.
Yeah.
You mentioned your series on football that you're doing with a couple of other really great comedians, Jack Harris and Rajiv.
Yes.
Yeah,
You
so
can get
tell
that
us
on
where you can
YouTube.
see that.
That's on YouTube. Just search for Two Footed on there. I'm on Twitter and Instagram, but I don't do anything on there. I just self promote like once every 3 months. So I'm not the best follow on there. Not really so yeah, you can get me on there. I mean, I don't know what the next step is for anyone in comedy now, or I mean, it felt like it was coming back, and then today there's more restrictions and stuff. So
Yeah,
God
a little
knows,
kind of
God
two
knows
steps
what's
forward,
next.
one step back.
Yeah,
type
exactly.
feeling.
But yeah, hopefully I'll be out and about doing more gigs soon, as and when my real life work, which is more valuable both financially and morally, kind of settles down a bit. So yeah, get me on there if you want, and I'll probably
Yeah.
hang on about gigs every now and again.
Well, we'll add links to all of those things to the episode description. And from a very selfish point of view, I hope gigs are able to go ahead over the next few months, because I would love to see you back at Jericho Comedy. It's always such a
Yeah.
treat when we got you there.
No, Jericho comedy has been massive for me over the years. It's definitely been a huge reason why I got any better than I did, and everyone's there has been so kind and willing to put me on at gigs when I probably didn't have much right to. So it's yeah, I'd love to
Not
go
at
back
all.
soon. And yeah, thanks for having me. This has been really fun. I've had
Mate,
such a lovely time.
this has been terrific. Thanks so much, Jake, and we'll hopefully speak again soon.
All right, take care, mate.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye. Bye. I absolutely loved that. Jake Farrell's Dream Dinner Party, a really fascinating group of guests. And Jake is such an interesting and intelligent guy. I just absolutely love chatting to him and hearing him talk about his areas of interest. We've added links to Jake's social media accounts and Jake's two-footed football vlog series, to the episode description. I've also added the link to the Penguin Random House Edinburgh Fringe Unlocked audiobook, which you can get on Audible. Jake's section's so fantastic, and there's some really amazing contributions from comedians like Ivo Graham, Jordan Brooks, Chloe Petts, and sketch duo Anna and Helen, to name but a few. It's so good. Check it out. I just love having these conversations so much, and I really hope you're enjoying them too. It would help us out a huge amount if you would like, rate, share, subscribe, all that stuff. I mean, not to get too deeply philosophical here, but if a podcast gets made and has no listeners, does it even make a sound? The Dinner Party is a Jericho comedy production. If you want to hear any more from me, you can visit www.connormcreynolds.com and have a look and listen to some of my other radio, podcast, writing, and comedy work. I'll be back next week with another fantastic guest chatting all about their dream dinner party. But until then, thanks so much for listening, and bye-bye.